We're here at Ballintubber Abbey, famously described by Cecil D. Lewis as the abbey that refused to die. It's an extraordinary place, a connecting point between living worship and the ancient stones of Croagh Patrick. Croagh Patrick, known locally as the Reek, is the defining feature of the Mayo landscape. And it would be hard to imagine anyone living here not having some attitude of reverence towards this pyramid which joins heaven and earth. In recent decades, archaeologists have found various non-natural features of the landscape in this region, which seem to be oriented towards Croagh Patrick. So it's very likely that it played some role in the religious practices of the pre-Christian inhabitants of the west of Ireland. Its earliest mention in Christian literature dates to the 7th century, when a writer by the name of Croagh narrates an event which he claims took place on the peak of the mountain. St. Patrick himself climbed the mountain, he explains, to fast and pray for 40 days and nights, like Jesus in the desert and like Elijah on his way to Mount Horeb. When Patrick reached the peak, he had no view from the top. Now that's familiar to many of those who climb the Reek today, but in Patrick's case, Croagh says, it wasn't a cloud that blocked his view, but a vision of all the saints of Ireland, past, present and future. A vision that was meant to console Patrick and encourage him in his work of fathering the church in Ireland. Just 30 years ago, archaeologists uncovered the foundations of a stone building at the peak, probably originally in the shape of an upturned boat like Gallerus's oratory in County Kerry. It dates to sometime in the second half of the first millennium, and it's the earliest indication that Christians in this area were engaging in prayer on this mountain. Mentions of pilgrims turn up later in annals, although they're only mentioned when something goes badly wrong. So in 1113, for example, we hear that 30 pilgrims died when struck by lightning. Interestingly, they were making that pilgrimage, we're told, on the eve of St. Patrick's feast. In the annals of Connacht, we read of an event that took place in 1224. Pilgrims on their way to the Reek were robbed. The robber was caught and received a savage punishment. His hands and legs were cut off. Who was it who imposed this punishment? Conor, King of Connacht, the son of Cathal O'Conor, who had this place built just a few years earlier. And however awful that punishment might be, it reveals how seriously the Kings of Connacht took their role as protectors of pilgrims to Croagh Patrick. And it suggests a motive for Cathal O'Conor's patronising of the Augustinian canons in Ballintubber Abbey. Just as canons were doing in St. Patrick's Purgatory at this time and throughout Europe, it's likely that the community here provided a stopping point for pilgrims, a place of rest and hospitality and prayer before these pilgrims made the final 2-day journey west to the mountaintop. Now the route that leads to the mountain from here is an ancient one, but by no means easy. And it was probably under these kings that large stone slabs were laid down at various stretches along the way, forming a 12-foot wide highway for pilgrims known as Tóchar Fórig. What we have here in Ballintubber then is a major religious centre built and operated with royal support, promoting and facilitating the pilgrimage to St. Patrick's Mount. Now the full range of that activity came to an end with the dissolution of the monasteries. But the fascinating thing is that the pilgrimage continues. Archaeologists have found traces of pilgrimage from throughout the penal period. And so did worship at Ballintubber, even when this place was unroofed in the 17th century. For 2.5 centuries, the local people participated in the Sunday Eucharist here in open air, kneeling on the grass that filled this nave. All that changed in 1966 when a restoration project was organised and this old ruin was re-roofed and polished up to something of its ancient glory. If St. Patrick did indeed have a vision of the future saints of Ireland, we can be sure that among them were the many men, women and children who continued to gather here when secular rulers turned against them, when security and splendour was a thing of the past. They knew, as St. Patrick did, that the true meeting point of heaven and earth is no mountain, however majestic, but the altar, however humble.